Hey everybody, welcome to Goshen Prepping. The military is preparing for war. They have not been hiding that. They've been making that very clear. It is inevitable. In fact, that's the direction we're heading. But the question is, do we have the manpower now to wage a war if it does happen? From Council on Foreign Relations, the uncertain future of the U.S. military is all volunteer force. I think most people know this. The U.S. military has a manpower problem for sure. And it's not just due to today's recruiting shortages. They're saying it's time for a comprehensive plan to solve the personnel shortfalls. And there's always certain questions on this channel that I get asked by viewers. And one of those questions is always about conscriptions, the draft, the coming draft. It's what people are talking about, not just in the channel, but you know it's on the mind of people across the country as well. The mind of, obviously, parents and grandparents, because they look at their kids or grandkids, those kids they love, sending off to a war. Of course, a war a lot of them do not believe in, or they think possibly might be orchestrated. It very well might be. And sending kids into that, it just breaks your heart even thinking about it. But either way, with the war coming, this draft or conscription is inevitable. And it's interesting looking at Google Trends. If you look at conscription, of course, people have always talked about it. I can go way back before this as well. But look, 2022, as soon as Russia and Ukraine went at it, now we see the thoughts of conscription going way up. And here we are now. In fact, they have a dotted line. The studies are showing it's actually going in this direction now. And it seems more now than any time NATO seems to be gearing up. They're not seems to be. They've made it very clear they're now gearing up for what they claim to be an inevitable war between Russia and NATO. And we're not going to get into who's causing it. That's beside the point. We have to prep and be ready for this. And if we look at a major overall war, a World War III between these countries or others, and the United States is involved, the draft is coming our way. But the question may not simply be, is a draft coming? I think most people agree it is. It's who will be drafted. Because the United States, we've always been in a very interesting situation through practically every war. Again, 2/3 of the people volunteered to fight in Vietnam. We've always had a large force of people who believed in America, believed in what we stood for, and volunteered. But of course, the numbers are very low for this. What's it going to be like if we actually get into a major war? Well, I think what we can do is let's look at some things historically speaking and try to understand the direction in which America may be heading. Not what we've seen in the past. Because in the past, it's always been, we've never drafted anybody younger than 18, unless they lied on it, for example. You can volunteer under 18 years old with your parents' permission, but our draft's always been 18 years old or older. Has it always been like that for other countries? Not at all. But when we look at this, let's go look at some, I'm going to read off some interesting statistics for you. I want you to understand where I'm coming from this. America, or the United States in World War II, people who were drafted were 18 years and older, going up to age 45. We drafted from that. And we're looking at 10 million people were drafted from the United States into World War II. And they said that all the people who actually fought, 2/3 of those people were drafted. So looking at what, maybe 15 million people fought. I haven't looked at those exact numbers, but this is what the stats are saying. And Vietnam also, 2/3 of the people in Vietnam volunteered. Isn't that interesting? Only 1/3 of the people who fought in Vietnam were actually drafted in Vietnam. In our minds, at least mine anyway, I always thought it was just the opposite. Now, with that, we saw upwards of, we don't know the exact numbers, of 30,000 people during the Vietnam time who were going to be drafted fled to Canada. And Canada at the time was a sanctuary and said, come on in. And I know there's a lot of Canadian communities where we don't allow, their words, we don't want a lot of these hippies in our neighborhoods and stuff. But nevertheless, they wouldn't extradite them back to the United States. And of course, post-Vietnam, we all know this, that the draft ended. But ever since then, I mean, not ever since then, but especially in modern times, there's been a push to try to reinstate it. And this is very interesting, by the way. This is Time magazine. And instead of talking about the draft like we're talking about now, it says, why bringing back the draft could stop America's forever wars. And they're talking about all the people fighting in the wars, et cetera, and what we've had to deal with, et cetera. And I mean, America does have a lot of what's called forever wars. This was in 2019. This is before some of the mess that we're actually in right now. Because the liberal side of the aisle always wants to tell you that the conservative side are the ones that are trying to push wars. That's not necessarily always true, because when we see the liberal side, like Time magazine is a very liberal magazine, they're the ones that's often pushing this kind of agenda as far as trying to reinstate the draft. And what this article is saying is, if we try to make it so there's mandatory service for everybody, maybe 2 years, then we don't ever have to worry about the draft again. And somehow that'll stop America's forever wars, which that part I don't get. But when you look at different types of countries, though, fighting in World War, even though in the United States we held that you had to be 18 or older, Not all countries did that. And is America heading down that path of basically being the imperialistic country, and therefore 18 may not be where we're going to be looking at for the draft anymore? For example, in World War II, Japan, they had anybody who was 14 to 17 drafted. Some parts of the war, in some locations, mind you, it wasn't everywhere. But as young as 14-year-olds in Japan actually had to fight for the Japanese emperor. The Nazis drafted the Strafe Battalion, prisoners drafted so they could actually fight a lot of wars. And Russia has done the same thing in the war against Ukraine right now. There's a lot of prisoners fighting. But more importantly, I think a lot of us know of the Hitler Youth. Hitler Youth it was less about them actually fighting at the time and more than simply just kind of like brainwashing them into being the military mind so when they got older they could fight. At the beginning of the war, there was 8.8 million of them, but it dropped down very quickly as a lot of them went in to become soldiers. For Hitler Youth, it wasn't uncommon for a 16 to 17-year-old Hitler Youth to be conscripted into the Nazi war machine. Eventually, they actually developed their own specific tank divisions, the SS Panzer Division, and often you'll have 16 to 17-year-olds running those entire divisions. In fact, it was very interesting. They became legendary for their violence. They were very violent, a lot more than just having like the civilities of war and the Geneva Convention. They were very violent against anybody who would easily just try to kill whoever went against them. Toward the end of the war, the draft for Germany changed drastically. They said now anybody 16 to 60 could be drafted, and they took a lot of younger people and older people, and that's what they claimed it was 16. However, numerous times as the Allies moved through Europe toward Germany and would capture some of the Nazi soldiers, they found a lot of them as young as 8 years old in uniform fighting the war. Now, were they drafted or not, it's hard to say, but obviously we're easily accepting 8-year-olds to fight in a war. Let me ask you this. How would you handle that today? I mean, not even just your 8-year-old son, but your son overall. How would you even feel about an 8-year-old fighting in a war? Doesn't it kind of like just make you want to vomit? But yet when we see imperialistic countries, suddenly that age of 18 years old kind of gets blurred. And even though right now we have, 18 years old or have to register for the draft, that simply may change too. And that max exodus going up to Canada can't happen anymore. The selective service in the United States, 18 to 25, is set up, however, that Canada will refuse you because if you dodge the draft, then you're looked at as being a criminal and they won't let criminals come in. And that draft also, of course, 18 to 25 is for men, or is it? There's been numerous times, again, liberals have been pushing this, trying to make it so women can be drafted, not just men, or at least right now have to register for the selective service. And this article is a few years old, but again, it's something they've pushed in the past numerous times. Congress moves toward requiring women to register for the draft. Democrats appear united in wanting the change, while Republicans are split on the issue. And there hasn't been simply just one or two times they pushed this. They've really been pushing this. I think it's just a matter of time, and it is inevitable before we see not our sons going off to war, but our sons and daughter. And the thing is, the draft is on our mind. The scary part is it's a lot closer than we think. I brought this article up on Goshen News. Conscription may be on its way after NATO warns of an all-out war with Russia. And this literally just came out. And they're saying on here that they're preparing for an all-out war between NATO and Russia. They're saying over the next 20 years. I talked about this on Goshen News and Geopolitics. I don't think we're looking at 20 years. I think we're looking at a lot sooner than that. But either way, there it is again. Conscription may simply be a matter of fact of what's coming very soon to the United States. And here's the thing. I'm in a dilemma. This is Goshen Prepping. I don't put out bad news. I want to put out news and how we can prepare for this. But I am completely transparent. I'm at a loss. How do you prepare for this? You can't flee to Canada. The only thing I can think of is if, for example, my son, who's military age, gets drafted. I know they've done it in the past where, hey, your number came up, you can quickly enlist, and that way you at least go into the area that possibly you want to go in because he's actually good in very specific things and may be able to contribute in certain ways. And I don't necessarily mean to stay out of combat. That's not the part I'm talking about. I'm talking about using your talents in a specific area. So I'm going to open this up to you, our YouTube community, which is my prepping community. I am allowing you an open soapbox. What do you think on this situation? First off, do you think we're going to have a draft again? Do you think it's going to include both male and female? Do you think they're going to eventually make it so America gets in such a bad situation, they'll allow children into the draft? That's a horrible thought, isn't it? I really want to hear what you say about this whole thing. Feel free to put in the comments below. Of course, as always, the rule is, even though it's open soapbox, you have to be nice to one another. And to me too. We always have to treat each other with respect as we put the comments down there. But as always, guys, thanks for following along. Put in the comments, I'd like to see what you have to say about this, and we'll see you next time.